Hi Shehan, so we meet again for another chat about your post-Booker life. So tell me about how it has been. Very frantic, very frenzied all these days.
Yeah, look, you have to be grateful for the attention. Usually you put out a book and maybe a few people notice it, but you're used to that, especially writing in Colombo, writing in Sri Lanka. So now there has been a huge amount of attention, and yeah, the book will be read widely in different languages and so on. So yeah, my last few months have been just interviews and thirdly, yeah, accepting the fact that this book is going to be quite huge and yeah, but so I'm enjoying it, but it is quite exhausting. So yeah, adjusting.
Interesting. Okay. So what are your plans with your Booker Prize? Are you doing something like Ondaatje did it at that time?
So Ondaatje, yeah, now that was the start, I think, of Sri Lankan, the modern Sri Lankan writing in English when Ondaatje set
Tell us
up
something
the
more about it.
Grecian.
What happened when Ondaatje
So
won the prize?
Ondaatje won the Booker Prize, I think, early 90s for English patient and donated, used that to set up the Grecian Trust, which every year picks the best writing in English across genres, novels, plays, poetry, and so on, and translations as well. So I think that really inspired a lot of young writers, myself included, to finish something and submit
Yeah,
it.
you
And
were
every year,
shortlisted two times. You won it one time and you were shortlisted one time, I think.
yeah, but many times when I submitted, I never even got longlisted when I
Okay.
was young. So I've submitted, I would say, about 5, 6, 7 times.
Okay.
Then Chinaman, but of course, each one is a learning experience, and I think we've unearthed some great books in that time, from Karl Muller's The Jam Fruit Tree to this day, Ashok Ferry, Andrew Fidel Fernando. We've had some great Grecian Prize winners, and so it was something that motivated writers to put their stuff out there, I think, and that's why now you go to a Sri Lankan bookshop. There's a Sri Lankan section. There wasn't that when I was growing up in the 80s. There wasn't a Sri Lankan section. There may have been Sri Lankan books. So yeah, that has spurred a lot of writing. Whether I, I'm not a very good business person or very good with finances, but yeah, it is my goal to one day, like my hope for Sri Lanka is that we have more work in translation, because we have the writing in English, which is serviced well by the Grecian Prize, but you also have a rich tradition of writing in Sinhala, and you have literature in Tamil, which I'd like to see more stories from the Tamil perspective, especially during the conflict years coming out. So I mean, I don't know if I'm the person to do it, but I'd certainly get behind the fact that we can read each other's work, that my work gets translated into Sinhala and Tamil, and we get to read more writers in those languages in English. So that's a project I'd get behind, and certainly, I mean, I'm inspired by the Kerala Book Fair, seeing all the work on libraries and so on done in this state. I think that's something that Sri Lanka can benefit from if we can give more kids access. I mean, there's a lot of crises in Sri Lanka, and I guess books are not high priority at the moment. But I think if we're planting seeds for a future generation, I think libraries and books and access to English and to all three languages will be crucial. So I suppose this is a project I'd like to get behind. But yeah, let's see.
But you're
early
already
days.
doing something about children's publishing. You are writing and publishing, I believe. Are you
Yes.
publishing yourself?
Yes. So
Yeah.
this is a project that
So
we
that
did.
itself is a start.
It's a start. I mean, it's in its infancy at the moment, pardon the pun, but I think, like, yeah, that's something I'm quite passionate about. My children, I think the greatest gift you can give your children is books, and I am very overjoyed to see when my kids are now reading for pleasure, not just because the school tells them to do it. So yeah, I'm now, we've got 3 titles. We're coming up with 2 more titles this year, and hopefully we can build that and build and also publish other writers as well. So that's a project also that I'm going. But yeah, things are quite busy now. Writing books and publishing books has to take a back seat to now talking about this
Yes.
Booker Prize winning thing. But yeah, I think exciting projects ahead.
So how is the publishing industry right now? I mean, I don't have no idea about the Sri Lankan publishing industry. How is it affected by the current inflation? You are going through a huge crisis, politically, economically. So how is the writing, how is the reading affected by this crisis?
No, sir. Like, okay, I think with the subcontinent in general, India is the powerhouse. India has the big publishers there, and if you look at Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, we have a few independent local publishers, but you still have to go to India if you want to get it widely distributed and published internationally. So there are publishing houses, and I think perhaps what's lacking is a generation of editors. You know, we have some fine editors, but I think that's really what I'd like to see. You know, getting Sri Lankan books to a stand. I mean, I benefited from having tremendous editors, Chiki Sarkar, Rimli Borua, who edited Chinaman, and Natanya Jans, who did Seven Moons. And so I think there's a long way for the publishing industry to go. But yeah, everything. Look, the crisis, books are not priority again. So now with my next print run, the cost of paper, the access to quality paper and all that, so that'll be a challenge this year with publishing. But you know, the books are, I mean, we had the Gaul Lit Fest, which was huge, and there's talk of reviving that.
It happened again this year after the COVID.
It has not happened for a few years now since COVID, but I've heard there's talks of reviving that. And the bookshops are still quite vibrant in Sri Lanka. The book fair that we have once a year, that is well attended. So there's interest in reading and so on. So I think, but obviously we have more pressing issues. But yeah, I think now one thing, for a long time now, right after the Booker Prize, the book was not available in Sri Lanka for a few weeks because importing and also, yeah, the lack of dollars. A lot of bookshops were saying that that was a problem, that they couldn't purchase these books. They were sitting in a cargo ship somewhere, and to access them there was a lot of problems. But I think, yeah, the book's been widely available now, so they've somehow overcome these things. But yeah, there will be challenges ahead.
So, see, in India, we have this issue of dissent being tramped up, and I suppose that happens across history, but at times it flares up, you know, that the tramping down on dissent flares up. And is that happening in Sri Lanka? Because, you know, I'm talking because this is about the crisis, and perhaps there is dissent coming out in writing. Is that happening there?
Well, dissent has been stamped out throughout our history, and the period I was writing Seven Moons about, 89, that was a particular period where voices were silenced and dissenters were silenced or disappeared. We had a very unique situation last year where the whole country was dissenting and as a unified voice, and we know the result of that. A whole government had to be dismantled, and I think also because the struggle has emboldened and brought together different voices, different factions with grievances, and also now social media, that's one thing.
Yeah.
They try to shut down the internet and all that, but that's something you can't really stamp out, so these voices are all out there. I suppose with literature, it's a bit more removed. Like, I think journalists are sort of in the front line. Our political commentators who are commenting about contemporary issues, yeah, they're still able to speak, but yeah, we have had situations where certain members of the struggle have been singled out and been called in. So, you know, this is a very real problem. But I think with novelists, I mean, I hope we're writing fiction, we're writing about past events, and so maybe we are able to navigate that by hiding behind fiction. But it is a concern. I mean, I'm always concerned about what I'm writing about and how it will be received, and whether, you know, because I've got a young family and I'm concerned about all those things. So there's plenty of dissent, and there's plenty of things to dissent about in Sri Lanka. And I hope more people will write, whatever their medium, whether they are going to spend 7 years writing a novel or whether they're just going to blog about it or tweet about it. I think talking about these things is... I mean, governments get nervous when people talk too much, but I think this is the only way we're going to come out of these situations, by talking and making sense of the past.
I believe satire is doing a lot of work. The Sri Lankan satire, you know, the typical quality, identity you have in dissent in satire.
So we have a thing called news curry, which is, no one knows who news curry is. But if you go to the Sri Lankan Twitter sphere or the Sri Lankan internet, you'll see news curry. They are kind of like the Onion. They have sort of fake news headlines, satirical things, and that gets a lot of traction. And I think the reason, it's quite telling that they are anonymous, that maybe they are able to be so daring because they are anonymous. And yeah, but humor tends to, and we see this even in the West during the Trump years and before and after, it was the comedians who seemed the more astute political commentators rather than the mainstream media were discredited. It was the comedians who ended up making people laugh, but also making points about where society was going wrong or the issues. So I think humor is a good vehicle, and it's maybe it's a safer way of making these statements. So I think, yeah, I'm glad to be part of that tradition.
No, I was interested in this phrase you used during an interview about Colombo guilt, the Colombo bubble. So tell us a bit more about it. It comes better from you.
Yeah, so I grew up in Colombo. I was in Colombo in 1983. I was there in 1989, and these dates we all know about it. 83 was the pogrom against the Tamil people, where tens of thousands lost their homes, and tens of thousands had to flee the country, and that's seen as the start of the prolonged conflict. And then 89, which I've written about. But even though I was in Colombo, I was sort of a Sinhala family, middle class kid, and we were insulated from it. We went to school and went to cricket practices and went to work, and you have to have normality, especially when you have a war that's going on for so long. So I did feel that, but then when later in the years, I had friends who grew up in Jaffna, who grew up in the East, who were in the army, who were in the plantation, the hill country during the JVP time, and hearing their stories were much more harrowing. And you do feel that guilt that you weren't really threatened. You were able to exist, whereas perhaps if I was born in Jaffna, same age, my life would have been very different. And so perhaps writing was my way of processing that guilt and thinking, why am I writing these silly cricket stories when the country has been through so much? Maybe I can tackle some of these things. So you see that with Mali Almeida as well. His character also, he talks about the Colombo bubble. He looks at all his friends, partying along in Colombo while this war is raging, and he feels that he needs to do something, and the way he was to do something is to go out and photograph and document these things. But of course he paid for that with his life, and that's the story there. But yeah, so I think that's if I have anything in common with Mali, and I don't think I have a lot in common with my narrators, even though people tend to confuse their voice for mine, but I think that's a basic mistake. I think I adopt these much more braver, perhaps much more funnier, much more entertaining versions of myself, because I suppose it's interesting and I'm able to explore that. Whereas my experience of the Colombo bubble was, I was a teenager, I just sat and watched TV and I kind of pretended things weren't going on and got on with my life. It's only later that I engaged with all these crises. But I think you still see it today in the country is struggling, even though there's a semblance of stability now. There are huge economic challenges ahead, but in December, Colombo, the tourists were back and the beaches were open and the lights were on in Colombo and people were celebrating Christmas, the New Year, and going to restaurants, spending. And so if you looked at Colombo, you think, where's this crisis? It's brightly lit. There's an electricity crisis, but the city is brightly lit. So I think that's still the case. Colombo sort of can carry on regardless because they have the privilege and the economic means to do that, while the rest of the country suffers. So I think that disconnect is still there, and I think my way of processing that guilt was writing about Mali Almeida.
Okay. So how much are you involved in politics, or not at all?
Not at all, and this is something I always make clear when I'm asked to engage. I'm not a political writer, and I've never seen myself. I'm not a essayist or blogger or anything like that. I write genre stories. If you look at Chinaman's a detective story, this is a murder mystery. The birth lottery plays with different genres. There's politics in the birth lottery. There's a few stories about presidents and so on, about wars. But also I've written science fiction stories about husbands and wives and housemaids and rock bands. And so I really shrug off that thing, because I think, look, there's a lot more astute, better informed political commentators out there, and I don't really see my role as that. I just want to tell an entertaining story, and it just happened that this one in particular was engaging with that violent period, so therefore a lot of politics came through. But I'm not involved. Even in the Aragale, I was watching from a safe distance at home. It's only after they breached the palaces and that I got onto the streets and we became part of it. So I'm not an activist. If anything, I'm a pacifist. I just sit in my room and type stories of things that interest me. So, yeah, I don't see it as my place to engage with this. But obviously, I have personal political opinions and all that. But I think my main job is to write entertaining stories, and I think that's hard work as it is. So, yeah.
So wish you a non-political, non-violent, and plenty of writing time in the days ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's a wonderful wish. Thank you, Sunita. Yeah.